Hi, welcome back. In this video, we're going to go over the select form elements. I'm currently in the app builder. I'm going to jump into our elements tab, hop over to the forms section, and there you have our select elements. I'm going to just drag this element into our form, just change the styling just a little bit, center it. So put margin right auto, margin left auto, put some padding at the top, or some margin at the top, call it 20 pixels. All right, so this is similar to other form elements. If we jump into the attributes, you can see the app data field, manage data flow, the value, and we have some select unique attributes. All right, and we're just gonna go over all of these from the top to the bottom. All right, so app data field, like always, is the field in our app data that this element is binded to. All right, manage data flow, which is by default set to false, simply means, are you managing the data flow or is the system managing the data flow? By default, the system manages the data flow, which is the data binding between our elements and the app data or the system, right? And if we set this to true, let's say we wanted to manage the data flow ourselves, right? Then we would need to configure an onChange function to basically capture that onChange event. And we also need to provide the value for our select element. But when this is false, as it is by default, the system handles all of these things. All right, so we have our options data. This is basically the options for our dropdown. We have the option is flat attributes. So basically when true, then the options that you provide are simply just going to be an array of whatever. It could be an array of text, it could be an array of numbers, right? But when options is flat is set to false, then the system expects an array of objects. Let me just turn this to false. When this is set to false, the system expects an array of objects, and the label field should point to the field in the object that should be displayed, and the value field should point to the field in our object that is our data. All right, so the name is the standard form name attributes. Disabled is a standard disabled attribute. Multiple just stands for being able to select multiple bits of data. The size being 1 is what size is visible by default. Autofocus required title. These are all standard form HTML attributes. Now we have one here called is non-reactive, and this is basically used if we want to have our element ignore app data changes. There are scenarios for performance optimizations in lists and tables where this could be useful, but in this example that we have here, we're not going to be using that. All right, so by default, our app data field points to the same name of our element ID. We can go ahead and change that. So let's go ahead and change that to, let's say, car type. All right, so we're going to go to the options, and because our options is flat is set to false, we need to provide an array of objects. All right, so we can use the no code syntax and do this using no code and just say, well, we want to have an array, an object, and let's say we could say field 1 is called select 1, right? Or just say label select 1 with no value, right? Oops. Okay. We can do all of this, right? But this is, going to be time intensive. So I'm going to switch out to code and just do this a lot quicker. All right. So we have an array, and our first object is going to have a label that says select 1 with a value of an empty string. Second one is going to say label, call it Toyota, and let's say the value is also Toyota, right? And the final one, the label, call that Honda, and the value is also Honda, right? So that's pretty much it. We have configured our options, all right? Then we have so we have our options, but we have not configured the label. So now our label field is going to be label, right? And the value is going to be value. And this is because our array of objects has those two fields, label and value, right? Now I can see that, select that drop down. If I were to select Toyota and I were to jump into my app data and scroll to the bottom, I can see that the car type has been set to Toyota. Same thing happens if I switch to Honda and I jump in, I can see that it's been set to Honda. And if I go back to select one, I can see that it has been cleared out. All right, so this is pretty straightforward. Now, what if, let's say, you wanted to use a dynamic value for your options? All right, so this is pretty straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and copy this option. Come over here to my app data. Just put it here for my initial. I'm just going to call it select option list. Paste that in there. All right, so this is not valid JSON, so I'm going to just fix this JSON really quickly. It needs double quotes. All right, this is some really exciting stuff. My apologies. You know what they say, do it right the first time. You don't have to do it again. All right. So this app data needs valid JSON. So we just need to make sure that whatever data we are entering, we are using valid JSON syntax. If not, it's going to basically flag it as an error. All right, we're almost done. Okay, the final one. There we go. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and copy this. So if I were to save and refresh the page, it's going to be available in my live app data, but I don't need to do this. I can just come over to my live app data and paste this in as well. And it's in my live app data, one of the beauties of this platform. All right, so I'm going to just go ahead and copy this field name. I'm going to come back in here. Let's expand this. While still staying in code, I'm just going to delete this. I'm just going to reference our parameter app data, and I'm just going to paste in that field and the same thing. So, you know, regardless of if you're using some static data or if you are maybe getting the data from a database, or whatever the case may be, this is very, very simple to configure. All right. So what if you wanted to manage the data flow by ourselves? So, you know, right now, as you can see, as we just demoed, the system was managing the binding for us. What if we wanted to do this by ourselves? All right, so this is pretty straightforward. All we need to do is basically turn on manage data flow, right? And as you can see, now our elements is practically unbinded, right? Then we need to go over here. We already have a function that we've done this with our impute elements. We have our basic impute on change function. We're going to reuse that function here. So I'm just going to say basic impute on change. So this wants a app data field, call it car type. Let's just jump into that function really quickly. So basic impute on change, jump into the logic workflow. We have provided a parameter here called app data field. We have one function step, which is update client's app data. What this function step is doing is basically setting our app data. So we've passed in the app data field when we just bind it to that function in our events. And we are basically setting that to the event's target value. So because this is a form element, it's going to have an event target value as one of the system generated parameters. And we're just going to use that here. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out. Okay. So if I went ahead and let's say selected Toyota and go into my app data, I can see that the car type is Toyota, right? And if I were to click on Honda and go back in there, I can see the car type is Honda. But if you notice, it's not really reflecting in our elements. And this is because we are using the managed data flow. So in this case, we need to provide the value, right? And lucky for us, the value is pretty straightforward. Let me just type this in. It's just the car type app data. So I'm just going to set this to parameter dot app underscore data dot car type. All right. And now it's reflecting properly Honda. If I were to change this to Toyota, it reflects it properly. So now we are back to managing this data flow by ourselves. All right. And if we wanted to, let's say, use flat options, it's pretty straightforward as well. We just have to use an array of, let's say, text, and we would have the same effect. And let's just go ahead and do that just because. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and come over here to our options and switch this out. But let's say an empty string up top. Call this Toyota and call that Honda. All right. So then I'm going to come here and say that the options is flat is true. All right. So now we have basically the same thing. Our first one is empty, so there's nothing, right? And then we have the Toyota, we have the Honda, right? This is still binded, right? Using our managed data flow, but it should still work the same way, right? So awesome. So there you have it for select elements. See you in the next video.